I love Jello. Doesn't everybody love Jello? Jello oozes. Let's talk about monsters. Let's talk about Jello. Let's talk about the grey ooze. So that is what we're talking about. We're talking about Jello. We're talking about oozes. Everything to do about Jello and monsters that are icky and sort of squidge and do strange things to you. It is probably one of the stranger monsters in Dungeons and Dragons. But we are going to talk about it. So if you're not familiar with my live streams, look down in the description if you're re-watching this particular video and you're not part of the live stream, and you'll find the start time down in the description. Just click it on and you can skip past all of this rigmarole. For anybody who's part of the live stream, if you're watching right now, you can ask questions, give feedback, all that sort of thing, and I will respond to all of that at the end of the presentation. And I'm going to try to be pretty precise and clear with what I present today before I get too tired and I start falling asleep. How's it going, Aaron? And yes, good morning to you. Well, it's morning for you and it's night for me. And I've just finished a shift at work and I am absolutely buggered. So, let us do some Dungeons and Dragons talk, shall we? Okay. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Wheeler and today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and we're talking about Dungeons and Dragons 5e, and this is monster tactics for the Grey Ooze. Yes, that's right. We're going to talk about old school D&D where Jello was actually terrifying and nasty. And one of the things I really love about the oozes is they are really peculiar in their nature, and some of them are quite varied and they do different things. But also too, how is it that you can turn something like an ooze or a Jello into something that's a monster that is terrifying? And I have to say that the Dungeons and Dragons 5e Monster Manual has made them somewhat tamer than I thought they really should be. And I am going to suggest a few tweaks to you as we go through this. So, first thing is, if you notice that there is a stone passage that is perfectly clean, then that's sort of an indication that you are dealing with an ooze or some sort of ooze-like creature, and it has been cleaning the entire surface completely, devouring metal, bone, wood, anything that might be lichen, moss, all that sort of stuff, anything that might be growing on that particular dungeon passageway or that cavern passageway, anything like that. If it's perfectly clean, that's a good indication that there is trouble ahead. So the first thing is, oozes are a family classic for Dungeons and Dragons. They are also a family classic for Dungeons full stop. So I want you to turn to page 243 of the Player's Handbook. If you could please turn to page 243 of the Monster Manual, not the Player's Handbook. And then there it gives you the stat block for the Grey Ooze. It also gives you a fair chunk of information about the ooze and how they sort of became what they are and how they sort of evolved. And Jubilex is obviously part of that history. I'm not going to go into the ecology and history of something like the Grey Ooze because I think that AJ Pickett does a far better job than I possibly could, and so you're better off to go and check out what he has to offer. And I do recommend checking out his video on oozes because it's very, very good. So what is the Grey Ooze? This is essentially stone that has been turned into liquid by the forces of chaos. When it moves, that is if it moves, it slithers like a liquid snake and it sort of rises up to strike should it decide to strike. And it's going to make that decision pretty much at the very last moment, because even though the ooze family are not very bright, they still need to be able to function and survive. And because they're so slow, they've got a lot of things working towards them and helping them out, but they've got a lot of things that make it really difficult for them to survive as well. So when it moves, should it move, and I would say a Grey Ooze is not going to move around unless it's actually needing to feed. So don't bother moving your ooze around. And if something comes by and it's within its range, within that that blind side of 60 feet, I would have it stop moving and shifting. It would be reasonably sensible to make sure that you're not moving your ooze around, because otherwise it's just going to get absolutely pummeled from a distance because it's so slow. Generally, the grey ooze remains motionless and will use something like its false appearance. So while the ooze remains motionless, it is indistinguishable from an oily pool or a wet patch of rock. So what it doesn't say in that particular feature is that it doesn't say anything about having to make a stealth check. It does have a stealth modifier, but why would you even bother? Now, I'm going to explain to you why. Why do you need to make a stealth check to tell and explain to somebody that they can see a pool of water on the floor or the wall is slightly wet? Why would you require a passive perception check? Why would you require a perception check? Why would you even bother with a stealth check? And I'm going to get back to this because this is one of the important factors when it comes to the false appearance ability. And I tend to do this with a lot of monsters that use false appearance simply because otherwise it gives things away far too easily. So this is an ambush monster and it feeds on everything but stone and magic items, which I have an issue with. But it doesn't feed on stone and it doesn't feed on magic items apparently. So false appearance makes no mention, as I said, of a stealth check. Even if it were detected, I would describe it as you spot a oily patch or pool of water on the floor or on the wall. And when you describe it, should they notice it, I would actually add in a little bit more detail, talk about other aspects of the cabin, like there's a few loose stones on the floor, and this is really to the whole idea of a dungeon master is a bit like a magician. What you want to do is you open your hand to present something, and when you present that idea, that image, whatever it is, you also want to be hiding something. So you're palming part of the information away, and also misinformation is very important. It's not you giving incorrect information, you're just giving information that makes whatever you just talked about less important because it seems to be just normal stuff that you would find in a cabin or in a dungeon location. So remember that. Make sure you add a little bit more information into the description of what's going on if they actually do spot this oily patch or this wet patch on the rock or on the walls. And frankly, I don't ever bother with a stealth check when I see something like false appearance in a monster stat block. Usually I don't even bother with it at all. Okay, so that's part of your problem, is trying to get them close enough, or the ooze close enough to actually be able to do something with it. The other thing is, remember, when you do this, it's actually smarter when the players enter a location, and I'm going to pull up my map location now. When they enter a location, to simply, particularly if there's already water in that cabin or in that dungeon location, just describe it as a patch of water. Say, here's just a patch of water. You don't describe it as you can see a grey ooze on the floor. That would be silly. What you do is you describe, you can see the rough walls of the cabin. There's a stream running through this cabin area. There's a little bit of a waterfall. There's a few loose rocks, and there's a couple of patches of wet stone around. That's it. And what you're doing is essentially hiding your grey ooze in plain sight. It's hiding in plain sight. It's better to hide in plain sight, and an ooze can, particularly the grey ooze, than to actually be behind the screen, checking passive perception checks and scores, and also rolling dice. As soon as you start rolling dice, the players will be metagaming and they'll know something's up. So the grey ooze is not very smart, and it's unlikely to use complex tactics, although it has developed enough built-in instinct to realise it needs to remain still and until it's been disturbed. When somebody disturbs it, that's its opportunity. It knows it's quite slow, so it moves around. It can climb 10 feet, so up a sheer wall's not a problem. Along the ground it's only 10 feet, so it doesn't move very fast. So it does need it. It's going to sit still and not move until either it's touched or something is very, very close to it. Fleeing from combat should your grey ooze ever get into that situation. So if you got your barbarian here standing on that location or being close by, this would be an opportunity for the grey ooze to try to grab onto them and start causing some pain. But they really can't flee. It's only got 10 feet climb, 10 feet moving across land. So that means unless there is a very small crevice that it can move through, it's got the ability that it can move through a space that's very narrow, like 1 inch wide. It can squeeze through that. That's the only way that an ooze, a grey ooze in particular, is going to be able to flee from combat. And is it smart enough to realise that it needs to be to self-preserve itself? Probably not highly intelligent, and as I said, doesn't use complicated tactics, but it's still got a wisdom of 6. I think that's sufficient to say that it's got some idea of self-preservation, but really running from combat is almost impossible. Unless the creature is 60 feet or more, it wouldn't even know it's there. So if the party passed by an area where there are grey ooze and they're outside of that 60 foot range, the grey ooze is just going to stay completely still. If they move into the 60 foot range of its blind sight, then it might start moving towards them. But as I said, it moves very, very slow, and usually this sort of creature can feed on all sorts of things. It doesn't need to start going after adventurers who have, 1, move faster, 2, can cause a lot of pain, and 3, they're never going to catch up. By the time they start moving towards it, those player characters have probably moved on, so it's almost a waste of time. They can feed on anything else. They don't need to worry about feeding on adventurers. This is an ooze. This is the sort of steps that I would go with. You're either going to use the ooze when it's stepped on, or if somebody touches or comes next to the wall where it's oozing out of a wall, a section of the wall. That's really the only time you're going to deal with it. So the grey ooze wraps around its victim, trying to squeeze it. I think when it does bludgeoning damage with its pseudopod, I don't really have the image of it forming a fist and bashing anything. That kind of seems almost ridiculous. But crushing something, that doesn't mean it's grappling, because there's no discussion in the actual stat block about grappling. But think of it more as it's wrapping around and trying to crush its victim, and at the same time it's trying to dissolve it. So that's bludgeoning damage and acid damage. And it can cause damage to anything that's non-magical, that's being worn, like armor, and obviously, if it gets close enough, it can start affecting weapons as well. So very, very interesting how this particular ooze operates. Weapons and armor are very vulnerable to the corroding metal ability, and it has a lot of detail about how that works. One of the issues that I have with the corroding metal ability is it only affects non-magical things. Non-magical metal can be affected. Things like bone and wood, things like that are easily affected. That's not going to be a problem. But if it's magical, then you can't affect it. And honestly, I feel like that just tames down the grey ooze and makes it really, really boring. I really think you should consider allowing your grey ooze to cause damage to magic items. Then it actually is far more fearsome and far more deadly, because the ooze is not really going to necessarily kill a character. It's probably pretty easy to get away from something like an ooze. But the damage it can do to armor and weapons, that's the real fear in the ooze, in my opinion. The only time that a grey ooze is going to be really effective is up close at melee. And of course, if you try to attack it with a melee weapon, it's going to just mess up your weapon. It's going to corrode it. So that's essentially how I use my oozes. I consider it an ambush monster, and really it's only going to respond when somebody is really, really close and they essentially either step on it or come extremely close enough that it can actually reach out and nab them. Things like dashing and disengaging, no, I don't think an ooze would even consider that. Something like the shove or grapple action, no, not really. It's not really bright enough to be able to do something like that. Okay, it's just got some very basic sort of tactics. Even something like the help action, if you have multiple oozes, no, the ooze doesn't use the help action. It's too complicated a tactic to use for something like this. And I honestly think you've got to make sure that you're focusing on the player's weapons and their armor to really be effective and memorable as a grey ooze encounter. Okay, that's really everything I have on the grey ooze. And if you found it helpful or informative, please share and like the video. I have about 500 plus videos. I do a video every single day. Some of them are live streamed. In fact, most of them are live streamed. So if you're not already subscribed and you like this sort of thing, then hit the subscribe button and the bell button beside it, and that will notify you when I am live and when I publish a new video. If you want to support my channel, well, you did that right now, and I do appreciate everybody who came and watched. Thank you very much. I have more videos, and the more videos you watch, the more you support me, and that's very helpful because I get a bit of AdSense revenue from that. I don't do Patreon, but I do have an affiliate link to Amazon and a book depository. You buy stuff online, I get a small commission. You pay exactly the same price, and that essentially helps support my channel, so I keep doing this sort of thing. And at the rate that I'm doing it. Normally, I used to only do like one video a week, and I realized it was not enough to keep up with the demand. So that is how you can support me. And even when you go through those links, you don't even have to buy the thing that it's linked to. You can buy other things. You don't just go through the link and then from there. Okay, so questions in the chat box. This is the time. I can see there's some questions coming through now, some feedback, which is excellent. I will respond to that in a second. So don't worry about it, I'm not going anywhere. If you're not part of the live stream though, you can ask your questions, give feedback, disagree with me, agree with me, tell me what sort of tactics, how you use your grey ooze in your games. If you want to ask other questions, I generally respond in the live chat to those sorts of questions. In fact, honestly, people have asked me questions in the live chat and outside of live chat in the comments section unrelated to my videos, and I always respond. I always do, always have, and I probably always will, until of course I stop doing videos. That's it, so we're done, and hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Right there. I got it on the 20 tonight. Haha. Okay, I'm not gone, so I am going to respond to everything. Aaron, thank you for actually giving me some feedback, and I'm glad you put in a comment there. That means we've got something to work with. Alright, Aaron, I feel as if I am giving away things to my players if I'm asking them, where do you move? Where do you move? How do you handle them moving through a cave without giving away a creature's location? Actually, Aaron, that's a very good question. Isn't that one of those most annoying factors when the game proceeds? Because you've located your monster in a particular place, and you don't know where they're going to stand. There's lots of different places they could step, right? Let's get rid of this one. Let's just say the ooze is here. It's not attacking, and the adventurers, they might just go across. They might not actually stand on the ooze itself. They might just pass by it. But you don't know how far away they are. They might skirt the wall, for all you know. Although you really can't skirt the wall, you can't go diagonal like that, you've got to go like this. But if you're using theatre of the mind, how do you figure that out? And even if you're using a grid, as soon as you put the grid out, they're thinking, okay, Dungeon Master has got a combat encounter lined up, something's up. I want to make a perception check. I want to check the location. And I've seen my players put their hands on their miniatures and look at me and move their miniatures, watching my facial expression and my eyes. Same sort of problem. Okay? So my suggestion to you is, whatever happens, they're going to step on it. The grey ooze would put itself in a location where it's easily stepped on by something. That is probably the easiest way to deal with it. There's water here. Where are they likely to stand? There's a pool of water right here. Put it in the 5-foot space so they have no choice. Then you don't need to worry about describing or figuring out where they step. That is the easiest way to deal with that. And if they don't give you an indication, and maybe the grey ooze is in a different location, like it's in a big open area, just roll a dice. You know, okay, we're passing through this area. You don't know where they stand, and you'll just roll a dice to determine, okay, fine, you walk through the space. And there are 5 players here, so I'll roll a 6-sided dice. I'm going to say that 6 means nobody stands on the ooze, okay? I rolled a 4, and I'll designate who's 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is the character that stepped on the ooze as they were passing through. That is probably the easiest way to deal with players trying to metagame and trying to determine where the grey ooze or the threat is, and for you to get your head around how to deal with that. Just roll a dice, always the best option, or place your monster in a location where they don't have any choice but to stand on it. It's like, yeah, it's exactly like that. It's like a trap. Does that answer your question, Aaron? I feel like it has. Yep. It's a really good question, man. I'm glad you asked it. It's perfect for this sort of video because it comes up all the time. I still have the same problem myself, and I've had more than a few arguments with my players about whether they stood on that square or not. And I said, you don't know which square it is anyway. And as you're passing through, you didn't tell me exactly where you were standing, as it happens. And it doesn't really matter if they stand on it anyway. If they move past it, that's good enough. The creature only needs them to be within 5 or 10 feet to be able to be effective. That's it. That's all you need. Okay, Aaron, what's this? FYI, I used the Will-O-Wisp today, and it worked well. Excellent. Yeah, I feel like the Will-O-Wisp is much more interesting and better as a monster if it's used in conjunction with something else that's also causing pain to the party, and you bring in your Will-O-Wisp when the character goes down. It becomes vastly more dangerous and deadly, or when a character's already taken a significant amount of damage and they're quite vulnerable. Then you can use your shock and then follow up with the consume life ability. Okay, so I'm going to leave it there. Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, everybody, for coming and watching. This is probably where we're going to end it for today. What is likely to happen tomorrow? Okay, I am probably going to live stream tomorrow, but it won't be so much for the Dungeon Master. I'm going to do a Dungeons & Dragons 5e workshop on combat, and I have been working towards this. I think I've done 2 workshops on the game mechanics of combat for Dungeons & Dragons 5e. So I've done 1 and 2. I'm going to do a 3rd one, and I'm probably going to focus on a different monster, but more importantly, it's not the monster, but I'm going to use a cleric. I'm going to use a cleric in the party. I'm going to roll dice, I'm going to do initiative, I'm going to make attack rolls, I'm going to cast spells, because somebody asked for me to focus on spells and dragons. So I'm not going to focus on dragons, but I'm definitely going to focus on doing lots more spells in the workshop I'm going to do on combat. It's going to be tailored more towards players, but Dungeon Masters might find it useful because I will do the back and forth play between the monster attacking and the players attacking in the middle of combat. So that is what you're going to get for tomorrow. And then after that, it is time to start painting. So the day after, I'm going to be painting miniatures I've made. So we are finished for today, since there are no more questions. I hope everybody has a good day, a good night, a good morning, and I will be back tomorrow.